Two gardeners can stand outside on the exact same August weekend, look at the same calendar, and make completely different planting decisions, and both can be right. In one garden, spinach, radishes, lettuce, and bok choy may be exactly what makes sense next. Hundreds of miles farther south, that same weekend may still leave enough warm season for bush beans, cucumbers, or summer squash in the right location. Same country, same month. Completely different planting clocks. That is why one of the easiest ways to waste the final part of the growing season is to copy a plant these now list without asking where that list was meant to be used. The seed can be good, the variety can be good, your soil can be prepared beautifully, but if the crop enters the season at the wrong moment, the calendar can quietly work against you. So today we are going to split this into two clear strategies. 8 productive crops that make sense for many northern gardens as the season starts leaning cooler, and 8 crops that can fit warmer southern gardens where summer may still have a strong grip. But I want to make one thing clear from the beginning. North and south are useful shortcuts, not hard borders. Your local frost pattern, your current heat, your elevation, your microclimate, and the actual maturity needs of the crop matter more than a line on a map. Before you plant anything, take 2 minutes to do a local reality check. Look up the average first frost information for your area, then compare it with what your own yard usually does. A low spot may cool sooner than a protected bed near a wall. A city garden can hold warmth differently from a rural property nearby. And this year's weather can run ahead of or behind the average. The average date is a planning reference, not a promise. Then read the variety description, not just the vegetable name. 2 lettuces can behave differently. 2 cabbages can need different amounts of time. A compact bok choy and a large mature type do not ask the same thing from your calendar. This is where good gardeners stop thinking only in crop names and start thinking in crop plus variety plus season. That small shift makes regional planting advice far more useful. Finally, protect a little margin. If a packet suggests a crop can mature in a certain number of days, do not assume every late season day will perform like a bright day in early summer. Shorter days, cooler nights, heat stress, pests, transplant shock, or a cloudy stretch can all change the pace. A plan with breathing room is stronger than a plan that requires every day to be perfect. Think of it this way. A northern gardener may be watching the frost clock. A southern gardener may still be watching the heat clock. One is asking, do I have enough warmth left? The other may be asking, when will I finally have less heat? Those are opposite problems, and they lead to different planting choices. Imagine a raised bed in a northern garden. The cucumbers are slowing down. A few bean plants are tired. Maybe a summer planting has been removed, and suddenly there is 6 or 8 feet of open soil that looks finished for the year. But that bed is not necessarily done. The remaining season may still be extremely useful if the next crop matches the window that is left. When the frost clock starts becoming more important, 3 things rise to the top: speed, comfort in cooling weather, and efficient use of space. You are no longer trying to recreate early summer. You are trying to use the weeks that remain intelligently. And the first crop earns its place for one reason above all the others: speed. Radishes are one of the simplest ways to turn a short opening in the calendar into a real harvest. They are compact, direct sown, and many common types move from seed to usable roots much faster than large fall crops. That makes them valuable when you do not want to commit an entire bed for months. A short row can slide between other plantings, and another small sowing can follow if your season and weather still support it. But the real lesson is not that radishes are magically fast. The lesson is that short-season crops become more valuable as your remaining window shrinks. If frost is getting closer, a crop that can produce something useful relatively quickly may be a better use of open soil than a plant that needs a long, uninterrupted stretch of ideal weather. There is also another advantage. Radishes let you test the new season. If the days are still warmer than expected, you have not tied up a huge section of the garden. If cooling weather settles in, you can keep using small spaces efficiently. A useful way to plant radishes late in the season is to think in small batches instead of one giant sowing. That gives you more than one chance at good conditions and keeps a large section of soil from becoming committed to a crop that finishes all at once. Keep the seedbed evenly moist during establishment. Thin, crowded seedlings so the roots have room to size up. And remember that the best radish for a short fall window is usually the one whose variety description matches the season you actually have left. Still, speed is not everything. The fastest crop is not automatically the most useful crop. The next plant may take a different path, but it becomes more attractive as summer heat fades. Spinach is a classic example of a crop that can become easier to work with when the season begins moving away from intense heat. Northern gardeners often gain an advantage, simply because the calendar is moving toward the kind of weather spinach prefers. That does not mean every August afternoon is suddenly perfect. If your garden is still baking in heat, germination and establishment can still be frustrating. The date on the calendar is not a guarantee. But when nights cool and the soil stops staying hot all day, spinach can move from being a difficult summer crop to a very logical fall planting. And unlike a single root harvest, spinach gives you a leafy crop that can be harvested at different stages. You are not always waiting for one dramatic finish line. This is where timing becomes personal. If your location cools quickly, spinach may move near the top of your list. If you are in a warmer northern zone or an unusually hot late summer, it may make more sense to give the soil a little more time and start with something less sensitive to the lingering heat. One practical advantage with spinach is that you do not have to force the whole bed to follow one schedule. A small first sowing can tell you whether the soil has cooled enough, while another sowing can follow when conditions improve. In a warmer spell, shade from taller neighboring crops or a position that avoids the harshest afternoon sun can sometimes help establishment, but the larger lesson is to work with the seasonal trend instead of trying to overpower it. That brings us to lettuce, one of the most flexible crops in the entire northern group. Lettuce is useful because it does not force every gardener into the same harvest strategy. Some people want full heads. Others prefer loose leaf types and begin harvesting outer leaves or smaller plants earlier. That flexibility matters when the season is changing. In a short fall window, flexibility is a form of insurance. If conditions stay favorable, plants can continue developing. If colder weather arrives sooner than you hoped, you may still have useful leaves to harvest, rather than an entire bed that has produced nothing. Lettuce also fits small gardens well. A narrow strip, the edge of a raised bed, or the space opened after another crop can become productive again. But there is one warning that keeps showing up in this video. Do not let a seasonal label override the weather you actually have. Fall crop does not mean plant into punishing heat and expect perfect establishment. For lettuce, variety choice also changes the strategy. A loose leaf type gives you a different timeline and harvest pattern from a large heading type. So the seed packet is not just a label, it is part of the planning tool. Keep seedlings from becoming crowded, give them consistent moisture, and use the harvest style that fits your remaining season rather than insisting every plant reach the same final size. Now, if you want speed with a completely different personality, arugula is worth a look. It grows as a leafy green, but it changes the flavor profile of the garden immediately. Instead of another mild salad leaf, you get something peppery, fast-moving, and useful in smaller spaces. Arugula is a good reminder that productivity is not only about pounds. A short row of a strongly flavored green can have a much bigger kitchen impact than its physical size suggests. It can be harvested young, it fits succession planting well in many climates, and it can help keep a late-season bed from becoming a one-crop project. Arugula also works well when you think of it as a cut-and-use crop, rather than a plant that has to become huge. Young leaves can enter the kitchen quickly, and another small sowing can keep the flavor coming if weather remains favorable. As with the other leafy crops, consistent moisture matters because stressed plants can become tougher and more intensely flavored. That is not always a failure, but it may not be the harvest you were aiming for. Those first four crops, radishes, spinach, lettuce, and arugula, lean heavily on speed and flexibility. But If you build your northern strategy only around quick crops, you miss another opportunity. Some plants are valuable because they can remain useful deeper into the cool season. That is where kale changes the story. Kale is not here because it is always the fastest thing you can plant. It is here because it can become a longer game leafy crop. In a northern garden, that matters. You may want some beds to give you quick wins, and other beds to develop into plants that keep producing as conditions get cooler. Kale also gives you repeated harvest potential rather than one single pull from the soil. That changes how you think about space. A radish row may deliver its payoff quickly and then open the space again. Kale can justify staying in the bed longer because the plant itself remains productive. With kale, spacing deserves more thought than it gets. If you want mature plants that continue producing, give them room to build a strong leaf canopy. If your goal is younger leaves, you can manage the bed differently. The point is to decide what kind of harvest you are growing for before you sow or transplant. A late-season bed becomes much more efficient when spacing, harvest style, and expected weather all support the same goal. This is also where many gardeners make a strategic mistake. They assume late-season planting means every crop has to be extremely fast. Not necessarily. The better question is whether the crop's growth pattern matches the conditions ahead. A plant that tolerates and even appreciates cooling weather can be a better long-term occupant than a summer crop that is about to run into temperatures it dislikes. Mustard greens fill a different role. They can move quickly, they bring bold flavor, and they offer another way to make a full bed feel productive without waiting for a giant head or root. For gardeners who like stronger greens, they add variety without demanding a large footprint. They also help break the monotony of planting nothing but lettuce and spinach. That may sound like a small point, but a productive home garden is not just a yield machine. It should produce food you actually want to eat. If you do not enjoy mild greens every day, a sharper mustard leaf can make the harvest more useful. Mustard greens are also a good candidate for succession thinking. Rather than filling an entire bed on one day, you can stagger smaller plantings so that the kitchen receives leaves over a longer period. In a changing season, that approach also spreads risk. One sowing may experience more lingering heat, while the next benefits from cooler conditions. And you learn very quickly what timing works in your own yard. The next crop is bok choy, and this one is especially interesting in raised beds and compact gardens. Bok choy can give you a satisfying, substantial harvest from a relatively small space, and smaller forms can fit into tight planting plans very well. The important thing is to respect the season. Bok choy is another crop that can struggle when gardeners rush it into heat simply because they are excited about fall. If the weather is still acting like midsummer, patience can be more productive than planting too early. But once the heat begins easing, bok choy becomes a strong bridge between quick leafy greens and a more structured vegetable. You get thick leaf stalks, useful greens, and a plant that feels like a complete crop rather than just a salad filler. Bok choy also rewards attention to stress. Plants that are crowded, dry, or pushed through abrupt temperature swings can move away from the tender, compact growth you want. Keep the soil evenly moist. Avoid letting seedlings sit in competition with weeds, and choose a size class that fits the space and season. Smaller forms can be especially useful when you want a quicker, compact harvest rather than waiting for a large, mature plant. And then there are green onions, one of the easiest crops to underestimate because they do not look dramatic. They are not going to dominate a thumbnail. They are not going to fill a harvest basket with huge roots, but they can make a small garden more efficient. Green onions are excellent at using the places other crops leave behind. Bed edges, narrow strips, small gaps, or spaces where a larger plant would be awkward. In a late-season garden, that kind of flexibility matters because you are often working around crops that are still finishing. With green onions, you can also choose the harvest stage that fits the clock. Some gardeners pull them young for slender scallions. Others give them more time. That means a narrow strip can remain useful even if the season does not unfold exactly as expected. Keep weeds down, because thin onion seedlings do not compete aggressively, and use them as a supporting crop around the larger vegetables, rather than demanding a dedicated block of prime bed space. This is one of the strongest themes in the northern strategy. You do not need to clear the entire garden and start over. You can replace tired summer plants, one opening at a time. A row of radishes here. Spinach, where a cucumber vine came out. Bok choy, where a bean patch finished. Green onions along an edge that would otherwise remain empty. And now, we need to stop. Because this is exactly where a nationwide planting list can become misleading. If you garden farther south, copying those 8 northern crops on the same August weekend may be too early. Your problem may not be running out of warmth. Your problem may be that summer is not finished with you yet. That changes everything. In a warmer southern garden, the soil can still be hot. Afternoon temperatures can still be intense, and cool season crops may be more difficult to establish than the calendar suggests. At the same time, the season ahead may be long enough that you still have options. Northern gardeners have already abandoned. So the southern strategy has 2 parts. First, use the warmth that remains only where it genuinely fits. Second, begin planning now for the productive, cool season window that comes later. Those 2 ideas sound like they conflict, but in the south they often belong in the same garden at the same time. The first 3 crops belong to the warm side of that equation. Bush beans can still be a useful late planting, where enough warm growing time remains. The key phrase is where enough warm growing time remains. Southern does not automatically mean endless summer. A gardener in one part of Texas, Georgia, or the Carolinas can have a very different remaining window from a gardener somewhere else in the same broad region. Bush beans work here because they do not require trellising like pole beans, and they can produce within a relatively compact, short-term planting. But you still need to look at your actual season. If the crop is likely to run directly into cold before it has time to produce, the fact that you live in the south does not rescue the planting. This is the point where the seed packet becomes useful. Do not look only at the crop name. Look at the maturity information for the specific variety. Then compare that with the kind of weather you realistically expect ahead. Give yourself room for slower growth as days shorten. The theoretical minimum is not the same thing as a comfortable planting window. For bush beans, the planting decision should also include what happened in that bed earlier. If the soil is exhausted, compacted, or crowded by residues from a declining summer crop, simply pushing seed into the ground is not a strategy. Clear the old growth, restore a loose seedbed, water deeply at planting, and avoid overfeeding with nitrogen that pushes leaves at the expense of the crop you actually want. A short remaining season rewards a clean start. Cucumbers are the next option, but they require even more caution. Cucumbers love warmth, yet they are not a crop to plant just because someone said southern gardeners can still grow cucumbers. They need enough useful warm weather ahead to establish vine, flower, and produce before conditions turn against them. In the warmest parts of the south, that window can still exist. In other areas, a late cucumber sowing can become a race you are unlikely to win. That is why this crop is less of a blanket recommendation and more of a decision test. Ask yourself 3 things. Is the soil still warm enough for quick establishment? Are your nights still warm enough for active growth? And do you have enough season left for the specific variety you are planting? If the answer to those questions is yes, cucumbers may still deserve a place. If not, the empty bed may be more valuable for the cool season crops coming next. If cucumbers do fit your remaining window, give them the fastest path to strong growth. Start with warm soil, reliable moisture, and enough room for air movement. Trellising can help keep a compact garden organized, but it does not create extra weeks in the season. That distinction matters. Good technique can help a crop use its opportunity. It cannot manufacture an opportunity that the calendar no longer provides. Summer squash follows the same logic. It can grow fast in warm conditions, which makes it tempting as a final warm season gamble. But fast does not mean risk-free. Pest pressure, disease pressure, shortening days, and the timing of your local seasonal shift all matter. The right way to think about summer squash is not, it is August in the south, so plant it. The right question is, do I still have a strong enough warm window for this crop to do what I want it to do? If yes, a final planting can be worth considering. If no, forcing one more summer crop may cost you the best timing for fall vegetables. For summer squash, Watch the health of the rest of your garden before you decide. If squash vine borers, mildew, or other recurring problems are already severe in your area, a late planting may face more pressure than the maturity label suggests. This is why days to harvest should never be the only number in your head. Real garden conditions can slow a crop down or end it early, and a smart fall plan leaves room for that reality. And now the southern strategy turns around completely. The remaining 5 crops are not about extending summer. They are about positioning your garden for the season that follows. Collards are one of the best bridge crops for this transition because they belong comfortably in the conversation. As conditions move from hot toward cool, they are substantial leafy plants. They can provide repeated harvests, and they fit the southern fall garden much better than delicate greens that may still be unhappy in extreme heat. The important word is bridge. You are not waiting for winter to suddenly arrive before thinking about collards. You are using the late summer period to prepare for a plant that will become more useful as the season changes. Collards give you another strategic advantage. You do not have to judge success only by whether the plant reaches one final size. Once established and growing strongly, individual leaves can be harvested while the center keeps developing. That repeated harvest pattern makes collards useful in a long southern cool season. It also means the plant deserves enough spacing and fertility to keep producing rather than being treated like a temporary baby green. This is also where gardeners benefit from watching the forecast trend rather than one isolated hot day. A single afternoon can still feel brutal while the overall seasonal pattern is beginning to shift. Planting decisions should follow the trend, not your emotional reaction to one weather event. Carrots bring us into root crops, and they require a different kind of patience. You are not planting carrots because you expect an instant payoff. You are planting them because the months ahead may give the roots a better environment than the peak of summer. The challenge is establishment. Carrot seed is small, it is sown shallow, and the surface of the soil can dry quickly in hot weather. So timing matters. In a very hot southern garden, the difference between sowing too early and waiting for a more manageable window can determine whether you get a full row or a frustrating patch of gaps. The seedbed matters enormously with carrots. Break up crusted soil, remove large clods and stones where practical, and keep the top layer from repeatedly drying out during germination. A light mulch or temporary shade strategy can help in difficult late summer conditions, but it must be managed so emerging seedlings are not smothered. Once the row is up, thinning is part of the yield strategy because crowded roots cannot all develop properly. Once they are established, carrots become a plan-ahead crop. That is useful because the southern fall garden is often less about squeezing in one quick harvest before cold and more about building a sequence of crops for the cooler months. Beets fit that transition beautifully. They give you edible roots, but they also give you useful greens, which makes the planting feel productive before the final root harvest. That does not mean stripping the plant bare. You still want enough leaf area to support healthy root development, but the dual-purpose nature of the crop is valuable. Beets also add diversity. A garden made only of leafy greens can be productive but repetitive. Root crops change the harvest schedule, the texture of meals, and the way you use bed space. With beets, the cluster-like seed structure often means more than one seedling can emerge from what looks like a single seed. That makes thinning important if your goal is well-shaped roots. The thinnings do not have to feel wasted. Tender leaves can be used in the kitchen. Keep moisture steady as plants establish, because the transition from hot late summer to cooler fall should be an advantage, not a series of drought stresses. Now we come to 2 crops, where timing becomes more precise because you are not only thinking about seed in the ground, you are also thinking about how a young brassica enters the season. Cabbage is a good example. In many southern fall gardens, transplants can be more practical than waiting for a direct sown crop to slowly build size from seed outdoors. The goal is to have a young, healthy plant ready to grow as conditions improve, rather than waiting until cool weather arrives to begin the entire process. But this is exactly where gardeners can overcorrect. Starting too early in intense heat can stress young plants. Starting too late can push head development into conditions that are less favorable for your local season. So the right timing is regional and variety specific. When you buy or raise cabbage transplants, look for compact, sturdy plants rather than tall, stretched seedlings. Harden them gradually to outdoor conditions, water them in well, and protect young plants from chewing pests that can do disproportionate damage while the plants are small. None of those steps changes the regional timing, but they help the crop make better use of the window you chose. Cabbage is not in this list because every southern gardener should set transplants on the same date. It is here because it rewards planning ahead. If you know when your area normally begins cooling, you can work backward and position plants to take advantage of that transition. Broccoli is the final crop, and it may be the best example of why planting date and harvest weather are not the same thing. A broccoli plant can begin its journey while the season is still changing, but the goal is to carry healthy growth into the cooler conditions it prefers for good head development. That requires more precision than simply seeing broccoli on a fall list and putting seed in the ground immediately. For many gardeners, transplants make that timing easier to manage. You can start with a plant that already has some growth behind it, then move it into the garden when your local conditions are more favorable. But again, the exact date depends on your climate, your variety, and whether late summer heat is still severe. Broccoli also makes a useful planning lesson because the central head is not always the entire story. Many types can produce smaller side shoots after the main head is cut, so a healthy plant may continue contributing beyond the first harvest. That makes plant health before heading especially important. Consistent moisture, adequate fertility, and protection from common brassica pests help preserve the plant long enough to take advantage of the cooler period you planned for. This is why broccoli belongs at the end of the southern list. It forces us to think beyond today. A good fall garden is not just a reaction to the weather you have now. It is a plan for the weather you expect the crop to grow through. So now we have 16 crops. 8 lean toward the northern strategy: radishes, spinach, lettuce, arugula, kale, mustard greens, bok choy, and green onions. 8 fit the southern strategy in 2 phases: bush beans, cucumbers, summer squash, collards, carrots, beets, cabbage, and broccoli. But that still leaves the most important question unanswered. What if you do not feel clearly northern or clearly southern? What if you garden in Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, the Mid-Atlantic, at higher elevation, near a large body of water, or in a place where your neighborhood cools faster than the city 20 miles away? Do not choose a side, choose your clock. This is the point where the entire video becomes useful beyond a single month. The first clock is your frost clock. How much usable growing time remains before your typical first frost? I said usable growing time, not simply the number of calendar days. As days shorten and temperatures fall, growth can slow. So do not treat the maturity number on a seed packet like a stopwatch. The second clock is your heat clock. How much serious summer heat is still ahead? This matters especially for spinach, lettuce, bok choy, carrots, and young brassicas. A calendar can say fall planting season, while your soil still feels like midsummer. The third clock is the crop's maturity clock. How long does the specific variety realistically need before it gives you the harvest you want? A baby leaf harvest and a full head are not the same goal. A quick radish and a heading cabbage do not require the same commitment. Your target harvest changes the decision. The fourth clock is the crop's seasonal preference. Does this plant want to grow through warmth, cooling weather, or genuinely cool conditions? This is the clock that helps explain why beans and cucumbers can still make sense in one place, while spinach and kale make more sense in another. Put those 4 clocks together, and the north versus south debate becomes much easier. If your frost clock is short, prioritize crops that can use cooling conditions and give you something valuable within the window you have. If your heat clock is still long, do not force cool season plants into miserable conditions just because someone online called them August crops. If your maturity clock is longer than your realistic season, choose another crop or a different variety. And if the plant's seasonal preference does not match the weather it will grow through, the calendar date alone will not save it. The best crop is not simply the fastest crop. It is the crop whose clock matches your garden's clock. For a northern gardener, the practical plan is simple. Watch the first frost, use open spaces quickly, favor crops that handle the cooling trend, and mix fast harvests with a few longer running greens. Radishes can give you speed. Lettuce and arugula give flexibility. Spinach can become increasingly attractive as heat fades. Kale and mustard greens add longer usefulness. Bok choy gives compact payoff. Green onions turn forgotten edges into productive space. Do not waste the final weeks trying to recreate June. For a southern gardener, the plan is different. Use remaining warmth selectively. If you genuinely have enough warm season left, a final planting of bush beans, cucumbers, or summer squash may still fit. But at the same time, begin positioning your garden for collards, carrots, beets, cabbage, and broccoli as the season trends cooler. Do not abandon summer too early, but do not wait until cool weather is already here before you begin thinking about the fall garden. And the next time you see a video or a seed list that says, "Plant these now," do not ask only whether the list is correct. Ask whether the list is correct for your clock. Because two gardeners can plant on the same day, choose completely different crops, and both make the right decision. The difference is not the calendar. The difference is knowing what season your garden is actually in. If you want, tell me your state or general region and what you still have growing right now. I would love to know whether your garden is racing the frost clock, managing the heat clock, or sitting somewhere in between.